I've seen firsthand what happens when great powers decide that the rules no longer apply to them. I saw it as a diplomat in the Middle East, in Egypt and the UAE, and later as a management consultant working inside Iraq after the invasion. And that's why what the United States did in Venezuela recently should make people uncomfortable. Now, as you know, the US seized Venezuela's sitting president, Nicolás Maduro, and flew him to New York to face criminal charges. He wasn't sanctioned or isolated, he was physically taken. And instead of stopping to ask whether that crosses a line, a lot of people are rushing to justify it. Now, I got a message from a colleague, and what he said isn't fringe thinking. It's the kind of argument that is circulating quietly in a lot of policy circles at the moment. He said, Obama indicted Maduro, Biden doubled it, Maduro trashed elections and stayed in power. China, Russia, and Iran have been encroaching on Venezuela for years. Venezuela is close to Miami, and basically if Putin can invade Ukraine over border threats, then the US should do the same with Venezuela, even if that validates China's claim on Taiwan. And Venezuela, he said, is a source of crime in the US. Let's unpack this. It's a seductive argument, I give you that, but it's also a very dangerous one because illegitimacy is not a legal blank check. If it were, then half of the world would be fair game for invasion. Now, don't mishear me. I am not supporting Maduro or defending him. Maduro is not a good guy. He's anti-democratic, fine. He's a bad leader, okay. But there is a difference between refusing recognition, imposing sanctions, pursuing indictments, and then physically seizing a sitting head of state. That's not law enforcement. That is abduction. And as a former diplomat, I'm really careful with words like this, but legally, what we're talking about is not ambiguous. Under the UN Charter, the use of force is lawful only in two cases. Firstly, self-defense after an armed attack, or explicit authorization from the UN Security Council. Neither applies here. Venezuela did not attack the United States. There was no UN mandate. And that means, legally speaking, that this was unlawful. Now, international law doesn't collapse because the target is unpopular. It either applies to everyone or it applies to no one. And the Ukraine comparison actually makes this worse, not better. Because the moment that you say, well, if Putin can do it, so can we, you're not defending the international order, you're abandoning it. You're saying, well, power decides, not law. And yes, that hands China exactly what it wants on Taiwan, not rhetorically, but structurally. Now let's talk about trade, because this is where geopolitics stops being abstract. Venezuela is an oil state and China is its biggest customer. But here's what most people miss. Venezuela accounts for about 4% of China's oil imports. China does not need Venezuela. What China gets from this moment isn't barrels of oil, it's narrative. So while Washington is looking impulsive and coercive, Beijing gets to say, well, we don't kidnap presidents. We do business with whoever's still standing. And having worked across the Middle East, I can tell you this. Countries don't choose China because they trust it. They choose China because its terms are clearer, its timelines are longer, and its engagement is less conditional on internal politics. Now that matters because international trade only works when there is predictability, legal certainty, and respect for sovereignty. So when major powers show that they're willing to override those rules, then investment hesitates. Supply chains start to become fragile. Emerging markets take notes and they start to ask themselves, well, if the rules didn't protect Venezuela, will they protect us? And this is where Iraq stops being a metaphor and becomes evidence. Now, I watched this logic unfold in Iraq. The regime fell quickly. What didn't fall into place were institutions, legitimacy, or oil production. Oil infrastructure is slow. Institutions take years, decades, and sometimes despite all the money, all the plans, all the promises, it just doesn't work. So when I hear talk about US companies fixing Venezuela's oil sector, I am skeptical, I have to say. We are talking roughly $100 billion, more than a decade, and enormous political risk. That's not really a strategy. It's more of a slogan. And the real danger here isn't that Maduro is gone. It's that the precedent that this sets. Now, it tells us, well, rules are optional. Proximity justifies force. That might makes right. That doesn't scare China. It educates it. And if the world's most powerful democracy decides that international law is optional, the rest of the world is probably going to follow. And in that world, trade becomes riskier, alliances become heavier, stability becomes a luxury. You don't have to like the Venezuelan government to understand this. You just have to care about the rules that stop the world from descending into chaos.